Hey guys, how's it going? And welcome to episode 7 of the poker vlog. To be honest, I wasn't even sure if I was going to post this vlog or not because it was such a short session that I played. This would be at the Seminole Hard Rock Casino. We're going to be playing 5, 10, 20. And I decided to release this vlog because something really interesting happens in the last maybe 10 minutes of play where a lot of big pots happen. So decided to throw it in there and I hope you guys enjoy. So let's get into the vlog. Let's get this vlog started. We get seated at the 5-10 table and everyone agrees to straddle the $25. We are 6-handed and pick up ace-king clubs in the cutoff. It folds around to us and of course I open to $60. The small blind calls, the big blind folds, and the straddle thinks for a while, looks as if he wants to 3-bet, but decides to just call, and we go 3 ways to the flop. The flop comes 10-6-4, 2 spades and 1 heart. This flop isn't the best for me, so when they both check to me, I also check to see a free turn. The turn's a pretty decent card, it's the king of diamonds, and they both check to me once again, and now I actually want to go for some value. I make a big bet of $125, hoping to get value from a king, 10, maybe a pocket pair like 8s, and charging the draws of course. They both call, and we go to the river 3 ways. The river's the 5 of hearts, which is a pretty safe card, and when they both check to me once again, I'm pretty sure I got the best hand here. The pot's around 550, so I decide to go for a small value bet and try to get called by a hand like a 10 or a king. The small blind folds, the straddle flicks in the call, and I table my winner. He mucks his hand and we pick up a decent first pot of the session. This next hand will be our GTO hand of the day, and it's a pretty interesting one since this situation doesn't really come up too often. The action folds around to the small blind, who's a good reg that normally travels around, and he plays at Niagara pretty often too. He opens to $75. I look down at ace-7 off and defend my straddle, and we go heads up to the flop. The flop comes jack 8-8. He checks, and I got some pretty good showdown equity with my ace, so I just check back to see a turn. Turns to jack of hearts, and he checks once again. And like before, now that there's 2 pair on the board, my ace high kicker is good a lot of the time. I don't need to bet here, so when he checks, I'm still checking back just to realize my showdown equity. The river is where it gets interesting. It's the 8 of diamonds and it puts a full house on the board. He now bets $140, a pot size bet, and it puts me into a bit of a tough spot here. I consider all 3 decisions. They all seem okay. I thought that we both do have about the same number of jacks and 8s, which is not a lot considering we checked both the flop and the turn. He's a good player, so the last thing I want is to put in a raise to like 600 and then get jammed on. So it's a pretty close spot for me between calling and folding here. But because of how passive the hand went, I decided to just make the call, and my suspicions were right. He does show the king 7 of clubs and we chop the pot. So now let's get started with our GTO analysis. For those who have never seen this before, this is GTO Wizard. GTO Wizard is the most comprehensive GTO library solution on the market. It's 100% essential to crushing poker, and I always use it to study and verify my plays. You can use the link in the description below to get your first month absolutely free and 10% off your first subscription. So back to the analysis. So first thing we should note is the small blind should be very wide when folded to, since there's only 1 player after him, only folding 48.5% of the time. Not having a calling range in the small blind is fine, but if you want to expand your arsenal a bit, king 7 suited is a great hand to mix. As played, he raises to 3 big blinds, and with a hand like ace-7 off, we kind of just want to call since we have position and already have 1 big blind invested. In fact, I think a lot of players think this hand is a lot better than it actually is. If we compare the EV of this hand, you can see that calling or raising only yields plus 0.19 big blinds, whereas a hand like 10-8 suited will have an EV of 0.67 big blinds. This is due to the fact that ace-7 have poor implied odds and have very good reverse implied odds. So I make the call, and the flop is Jack 8-8. And this is a board where if he wants to, he can just range bet, because if we look at the ranges of both players, we actually have almost the same number of jacks and eights. If I go into the breakdowns tab, you can see that 14.3% of his range contains a jack, and these are all his hands that contain a jack, and 7.9% of his range contains an 8, and that's all these hands right here. And if I were to add these two numbers together, that's 22.2% of his range contains an 8 or a jack. So let's compare that with my range. 13.3% of my range contains a jack, and 8.9% of my range contains an 8. And surprisingly, that's also adds up to 22.2% of the range contains an 8 or a jack. However, he does have one advantage, and that's I don't have any overpairs. Pocket aces, kings, and queens represent 3.8% of his range. But if I check my range, you guys probably already know the answer, but I have no overpairs in my range, because if I did have aces, kings, or queens, I would have 3-bet pre-flop. And this is why, after the very top of our range, our equity drops rapidly. The small blind will dominate us with his overpairs. And on top of that, he has stronger jacks, since our range don't contain hands like ace-jack suited or king-jack suited, because we would definitely 3-bet at least a good percentage of the time with those hands. So going back to the hand, he checks, and I should just check a majority of the time as well with a hand like ace-7, and I do that. The turn's the jack of hearts, which slightly improves my range since my small jacks now chop with his big jacks like ace-jack. GTO mainly wants to bet with a jack, 8, small pocket pairs, or draws, and check everything else. And when he does do that, GTO mainly wants me to check back with ace-7. In fact, I should check back most of the time here and bet 75% pot usually with similar holdings like a jack, 8, or flush draws. Finally, the river's the 8 of diamonds, and GTO wants him to really polarize his hand here and bet 1.5x to get me off a chop or to get value from me when he has a jack or quads. GTO mainly wants him to check with his suit, but it doesn't really matter too much. And if he does bet 1.5x, I'm only supposed to call here with ace-7 about 63% of the time. But when he bets only 90% of the pot, this number obviously will go up. And of course, all three of my actions that I'm considering right now will be 0 EV. And yeah, that's it. That concludes the analysis. I think we both played this hand quite standard according to GTO. I think we could just get back into the vlog now. Now, continuing where we left off, we now get ace-5 offsuit in the strato. It's down to 4-handed at this point, and it seems like the table's about to break. It folds around to the big blind, who only has $230 left since he just got stacked the hand previously, and he didn't top up. He limps, and I assume he's a little bit tilted and ready to go home, so I put him all in for his entire stack of 230, and he calls. He opens his hand and shows pocket fours, and we're flipping. The flop comes king 10-7. We need to hit a 5 or an ace, or else he doubles up through us. But the turn is the 4 of diamonds. That's it. We're drawing dead. Turns an inconsequential 10, and he doubles up through us. At least he was short stacked, so we don't take much of a hit. The table breaks a few hands later, and we are moved to the other table. I'm up about $350 so far, and I got about an hour of playtime left. I do nothing but fold and play some small pots for the next 60 minutes or so, and just when I'm about to leave, I get pocket queens on the button. There's a low jack limp, he's the fish on the table, the cutoff opens for 100, and I put in the 3-bet, the $300. Low jack regrets limping and folds, and the cutoff calls. We go heads up to the flop. The flop isn't too bad for us. It comes 8, 6, 5, all hearts. He checks, and if I didn't have the queen of hearts, I'd be more inclined to just check back. But since I do, I can probably bet a lot more. I see bet $125, which is about 20% of the pot. And this bet aims to get calls from the cutoff with a wide variety of hands like pocket tens, pocket jacks, maybe ace queen or king queen off with a heart, and other one pair hands as weak as like 8-9. It also retains the betting lead on the turn. He does make the call, and we're gonna see a turn. The dealer puts out a jack of spades, and now things get a little bit weird as he donks for $325. And honestly, the jack of spades isn't even a bad card for us. Even if villain had jacks, I can still hit a heart on the river to save me. I want to keep his bluffs in also, so I make the call. The river's a pretty good card for us. It's the ace of hearts. We now hold the second nuts, and he decides to check. Now, he doesn't have too many king of hearts in his range, and it certainly doesn't make sense for him to lead the turn and then shut down on the river with the nuts. I'm going to be checking back a lot of my pocket pairs that don't contain a heart, and at this point, if I remove the possibility of him having a flush, I can only hope that he has a set of jacks. And even then, if I jam, he might just fold it with 4 flush on the board. Taking that into consideration, I bet about a third of the pot, $500, giving a good price for hands like pocket jacks, eights, ace jack, those type of hands to call, but he doesn't give much thought and folds, and we pick up a nice little pot to leave the session. But wait, even before I can stack my chips, we get into another crazy spot. We are currently sitting with a $3,300 stack, up $1,300 off our initial $2,000 buy-in. UTG limps, and he's the player that limped last hand. Hijack, the same player that I was also involved in last hand, opens again to 100, and this is a bit of deja vu. It's the same players taking the exact same actions last hand, but this time I look down on pocket fours and just decide to call, because this table's a bit passive and I don't have to worry too much about getting squeezed. It folds around back to UTG, and again, he's the fish on the table. This time, he decides to make the call, and we go 3 ways to the flop. And boy, what a flop it is. It comes queen 7-4, 1 diamond and 2 clubs. We flop bottom set. UTG checks. The hijack C bets $125. I'm in position, and I know that if the fish has a piece of anything, he's gonna continue. I decide to slow play my hand here and just call, and UTG calls as well. We're still 3 ways going to the turn. The dealer throws down the jack of spades, which is not a threatening card at all. UTG checks, and the hijack continues firing, this time for $450. And normally, I just go all in here, but again, I've seen UTG make some very loose calls, and I want his money in here as well. I call praying UTG also calls, but now, something unexpected happens once again. UTG check raises all in for his stack of 1330. Hijack is now in the tank. He's thinking, and I'm not folding no matter what, so I hope he calls too. But after some time, he finds a fold. Now, it's a pretty easy call for me, especially against the fish. If I get coolered, right before I leave, then I get coolered. I call, he opens his hand, it's 5 of clubs, 6 of hearts. 5-6 offsuit, that's what he called me with. He flopped an up and down straight draw. We agreed to run it twice. The first river is the 5 of diamonds, giving him a pair. The second river is the 6 of spades, giving him 1 pair yet again. We scoop a huge pot of $5,500, and we rack it up. Man, what a crazy last 20 minutes that was. I think the Seminole Hard Rock might be my favorite place to play now. We cash out for $5,495. That's $3,495 profit. What a good way to end this session.